Okay, in this video we're going to be looking at finding a researchable topic, particularly design considerations. There are several areas that you need to consider here. Is it feasible? Can it be done in a year? Is it practical? Can it be produced? Is it usable? Can it be used easily by the consumers or whoever would be using it? And is it marketable? This is not necessarily true in all research, but for iGEM certainly the potential marketability of the product is important. And so we'll give examples of each of these from some of the previous iGEM teams. Feasibility. Can it be done in a year? Most research takes many years. Research grants are often for 1 to 3 years, sometimes 5 or 10 years. Product development for a company is at least 5 to 10 years. And yet, you're being asked in iGEM to do this all within 1 year. So, for instance, the Mr. SA, where they were trying to develop a dressing to combat antibiotic-resistant bacteria. They wanted to develop something that could kill bacteria on the surface, extracellular, but that could also go into the cells, intracellular. And then they wanted to develop a dressing that could be used to apply this. Any one of those would have been really sufficient for 1 year's research for a team. And I suggested to them that they limit it to one of these, and they said, no, we want to develop all of them. Well, that's fine, but they only got halfway in the development because it's really too much for 1 year. And this is true with any research. You need to think about the time limits that you have to do it. Second is practicality. Can it be produced? Think about scaling up to an industrial scale, to the actual industrial processes that are used. One of the teams that did very well with this was Ligreen, where they were developing the paper cup liners. And they found out about the manufacturing process, that with the plastic, they develop it into little plastic pellets that they then melt to apply as a coating to the paper cups. And so they planned for that from the beginning. But one of the limitations that they found was that lignin, the base product that they were using, is black. And that produced then a black cup liner, which was considered to be negative by industry because it doesn't look white and clean. So again, from the beginning, you need to consider the practicality. Usability. Can it be used easily? Why would a consumer choose your product versus some other product on the market? Who is the consumer? How would it benefit them? How difficult is it to use? Okay, an example from the African swine fever test that they developed. This involved a difficult procedure because they had to draw blood from the ear of a pig in order to do this test. And there was very little motivation for the farmers to cooperate because if their pigs had swine fever, they had to destroy all the pigs on their farm. And it also involved a very complex internet-based recording system in order to ensure that the farmers actually were complying with this very difficult and perhaps costly procedure. Denditex, detecting dengue fever. They developed on the idea of a rapid test kit, which was very good. But again, you have to consider where is your sample coming from? Drawing blood is much more difficult than like the COVID nasal swabs. But much easier is if you could spit into a container and have that be your test. So there are different reasons why you might have to do one or the other, but try to think of how easy it is for the consumer to use, if it's possible. Fourth, who would buy it and why? How would it improve on whatever the current best is in the market? It needs to be better, easier, cheaper. What's the motivation for the consumer? How much would they be willing to pay? Could you break into the market? How tightly locked is the market already? Could you perhaps, instead of selling a product, sell your design to some company that's already doing similar things? that's another way to market your idea. For instance, again, the first group that developed CareIndex, initially they wanted this to be a home product. This was something that was of particular interest to the team leader. They convinced the team to work on it. But what they developed turned out to be an extremely complex machine that was far too expensive and far too large for home use. And so they determined at the end that they would have to sell this to schools and the government in order to get it used on a wide scale. Otherwise, there was no market for it. Another example of this would be the PAC Omega, cardiovascular disease. They had to change their product in the middle of the year as they found out more about the health benefits of different fatty acids. We'll talk about that in a later talk. But they also then changed their ideas for marketing from something that could be taken as a supplement. Because they're using E. coli, they thought, well, maybe we can establish a colony of E. coli to produce these in our own intestines. And so that's something that they thought about and began developing late in the year. But again, there was no data on cost of any of these different products. And so it was difficult to evaluate the marketability. So iGEM is about genetically engineered machines. And that means, because it's engineering, that they're seeking to develop a solution to a problem. So number one, you have to identify what is the problem. Number two, can you create a workable, novel solution? And then, is that solution feasible? Can it be developed? Can it be marketed? Can it be used by the consumer? Okay, so this was in particular about iGEM, but I'm sure there are similar things in your research or in other fields. In linguistics, do you have to consider things like feasibility?
Definitely, especially in applied linguistics. In applied linguistics, we want to find solutions to problems too. So of course, you have to make it feasible and make it practical and also make it usable and preferably, eventually, make it marketable.
Can you give us some examples?
For example, my students who are teaching Chinese as a second language, they want to develop a website to attract targeted audience to their schools. So in this case, how do you evaluate different websites so you can come up with solutions to target different audiences for those 40-year-old who are already managers versus those 20-year-olds who are still students depending on their parents? That's a totally different designs. So in order to write a thesis like this, you have to survey and choose 3 different types of websites. So you can evaluate which website is very suitable and effective for what type of audience.
But for somebody doing a thesis, just like with iGEM, you also have to consider the time element, right?
Yes, that's why I always ask my student the first question, when do you plan to graduate? And then, if they say 3 months versus 1 year or 1 month, those 1 month, of course, it's really not practical, not feasible, right?
Right.
But 3 months versus 1 year, then you need to think about different ways of approaching your topics.
And you also have to think about what data is available to that particular student, because different students have access to different types of data.
Especially those who are teaching. They teach for a certain school or a certain 补习班 cram school. Do they have access to the students? But then they also have to consider IRB. Is it ethical to conduct research on a particular group of students, especially if they are not 18 years old? Okay, and also the school representative, are they willing to be interviewed or to be investigated? They also have their own ideas, their own agenda. So you need to see if the people are available, if whatever ingredients are available, easily accessible.
You had one student one time that was working with a business and therefore had inside information on communication within that business that would not be available to basically anyone else. And so that was a perfect topic for her to pursue because she had access to this source of information. And so again, some of your team members may have access to particular sources of information, groups of people, or something like that, that give an advantage to your team. If you use the strengths of your team, the strengths of those individuals, no matter what field it is that you're working with, you can get a better result.